By the time you're done with this, you're going to be in a position to understand the various types of purchase, such as new purchase, modified rebuy, straight rebuy, implications of the business needs on the types of purchase, as well as roles of procurement in developing a business case. And let's start by understanding what business needs are. And the truth is, at times your obsession, okay? Your obsession with cost reduction, your obsession with getting things delivered fast, your obsession, all this stuff might actually not be good if you haven't considered the actual business needs. Here's an example, okay? So look at this one. Imagine a small software company that is quickly growing and is currently in need of upgrading its IT infrastructure. In this case, the IT guy has identified specific requirements for high-performance servers that can handle increased data processing and support new cloud-based application. That's the thing, right? So the IT guy has identified that, and then you have the procurement team or the procurement department. So the procurement office puts out a request for quotation, okay, RFQ, with cutting cost in mind. So he finds a vendor whose prices mean that the company can save 20% of the budget allocated. But that actually looks like a reason to celebrate, right? You're saving 20%. But then it turns out that those servers cannot handle the actual, sort of pressure that the IT people are complaining about. They cannot handle the work, okay? They're not able to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. And, the IT guy just looked, the procurement guy just looked at it in terms of, we are going to save 20%. So cutting cost was the objective. But what about the business need? At a basic level, we can look at business needs in terms of input needed by the organization. And this simply means that if you look at any organization, we have inputs, okay? Raw materials, whatever it is, right? Which are going to be processed into output. So when we're talking about business needs, we're simply asking ourselves, what are those needs, right? That is at a very basic level. So things like materials, component, energy, machinery, skills, all these are inputs, right? So the people who need these will obviously notify the procurement through some form of communication, things like purchase requisition, new product specification, bills of materials generated by material requirement planning systems, etc. And when the procurement people get these, okay, so these are the needs, right? These are the business needs. So when they get that, then of course they just don't go out and buy them. They have to purchase these things with, they have to look at these things in terms of the 5 rights of procurement. So they have to look at it in terms of getting products of the right quality, supplied in the right quantity, to the right place, at the right time, for the right price. And so from that perspective, okay, we can conclude that the functional and operational objectives of procurement are basically to provide right inputs to meet operational needs of the organization. But, okay, if you look at an organization, their needs are not just going to be summed up to operational needs. There are business needs that go beyond the operations of the business. So in this case, we're talking about things like the need to operate profitably, which in a private sector will actually mean return on investment. In public sector, that could translate to, good use of money, okay? Because you're using public funds. So another need is to achieve and maintain competitive advantage over competitors, to attract and retain high quality employees, supply patterns, business allies, okay? Supporting continuous and sustainable learning and improvement. So what is the point here? So the point is for you to understand that when you're dealing with, when you're looking at business needs, you just don't want to sum it up in terms of the operational needs, okay? You have to understand that it's bigger than that. You have to understand that the procurement, okay, the way the procurement will come in, the procurement is supposed to also contribute to things like the bottom line profit of the unit or the enterprise, the addition of shareholder value and product or service value addition, hence customer satisfaction, the fulfillment of other commercial and strategic objectives of the business or business unit, including things like competitive advantage and market share, okay, sustainable production, corporate social responsibility, innovation, and so on. That is a quick look at what business needs are. Of course, as always, as you continue, if you have a question, you just ask a question. Let's talk about types of purchase, such as new purchase, modified rebuy, and straight rebuy. Now, the type of purchase, okay, in an organization can actually be classified, or rather can be categorized into 3 categories. So in this case, let's say someone wants to buy a phone, then they could be buying a phone, like they could be buying a phone similar to a phone they had. So in that case, someone says, I have a phone, right? And somebody says, I like your phone. So did you buy it? And then they say, I bought it there. And then you just go and order another one. So in that case, you haven't changed anything on the phone, the price, the specs, nothing, right? So that is just, a straight rebuy. You add it and you're rebuying something similar to what you already have. Now, somebody can say they made a new version of that phone. And so I want to go and get a new version. So what is happening in this case? You're modifying your specifications regarding the phone, okay, or your needs regarding the phones have changed. And so that becomes a modified rebuy. Or somebody who doesn't have a phone and just says, I'm going to buy the phone for the first time. And so that's just a new purchase. That's the point here. So you can be buying something for the first time. You can be buying something similar to what you already have without changing the terms. Or you can be changing the terms of something, okay? And so that means you're modifying whatever it is that you had. So it's a modified rebuy. So that's the thing, those 3, right? From a procurement perspective, your purchase will fall into those 3 categories. So let's see how they work. And to start us off, let's start with a straight rebuy. In this case, the organization is buying something they have bought before. It is an equivalent of saying add us 30 more stationary items. The buyer may already have a preferred supplier and perhaps a standing agreement or a call of contract enabling stock replenishment orders without further investigation or negotiation. And that could also mean that the buyer in this case will not have to do things like establishing specification, surveying the market, inviting quotations, okay? And why are they doing that? Because they're just buying something that, from a supplier that they've already dealt with before. It's an equivalent of creating a framework agreement and then you're just saying, look, we told you at some point you're going to get 30 of these things, now just supply those things. So, it's saving them time. And they could be dealing with a supplier who is in an approved list. So the question then becomes, what is an approved supplier list? Think of it this way. You can go into the market, start looking for fresh suppliers every time you want to buy something. Or you can just vet your suppliers and add them to a given list, okay? Put them in a list. So that's how you end up with a framework agreement or a framework arrangement, okay? Slightly different in terms of formality. So these people are already pre-approved. So anytime you want to buy something, you just look at the list of suppliers that you have. These are suppliers that you vetted based on technical, functional, or even financial skills. This type of purchase is often used for routine items, for example, MRO, that is maintenance, repair, and operation items, which are routine items that can be used for running of an organization and include services such as cleaning, spare parts for machinery, etc. Stationary items such as pens, papers, ink, cartridges, raw material, okay, such as steel, bulk, chemicals. And then the question can be, how does that work in practice? So here's an example of how that can actually take place in practice. Let's take a manufacturing company that needs lubricant, okay, and cleaning items to maintain its machinery on regular basis. So it's not going to be the case that anytime they want to buy those lubricants or those cleaning things, they just, again, have to have a meeting, request for quotations, evaluate these quotations, choose a supplier, send a purchase, and they're not going to do all that, right? I mean, they're saving time. Since these are things that they buy regularly, it means they already have a supplier whom they trust. So the maintenance department places an order for the same brand and quality of cleaning and maintenance lubricant from the same supplier they've been working with because the product meets the required standards and the price is stable. That is an example of a straight rebuy, and in this case, what are we buying? The MRO sort of products. With straight rebuys, the transactions are often relatively low volume or low risk. And for the most part with those sort of products, if there are any supply chain risks, then what do? You simply find another supplier. So you're not dealing with things that are complicated that are going to require a lot of investigation. So those are the sort of things that you put under straight rebuy. So that's straight rebuy, and that's how it works in practice. Again, if there is any question, let me know. Now let's talk about modified rebuy. In this case, we're talking about you purchasing a product or service that you've bought before, right? Except now you're making some slight changes to either the specification or some aspect of, that contract. For example, if you bought like a pen, okay, and they cost you X, and now you're saying, I'm going to buy these things in bulk, and therefore this time I need to give me a discount of whatever percentage. So you see that price, the price you're getting now is different from the price that you used initially, and therefore the price has been modified, even though the products are the same. Now what happens if you buy them again in future? Assuming nothing changes, assuming they go back to the price that you formerly used, then again, that has been modified, and then it becomes just a straight rebuy as you continue, assuming nothing changes in future. For instance, if a manufacturing company that has been ordering raw materials like steel sheets from the same supplier for the last 3 years decides that due to changes in production process, they now need the steel to be of higher quality with different coating to improve corrosion resistance, that is a modification to what they normally buy. Okay? There is a change. Those are the changes. In this case, the company could reach out to the same supplier but request adjustments to the steel quality and coating. Or they could just go and find a new supplier. Again, look, the thing is that if you're modifying the purchase, all right, it doesn't mean that you have to continue working with the same person you've been working with. You can just go and find a new person, which, still gives it the same name. It's still a modified rebuy, especially since you're dealing with a new supplier. They could also renegotiate the price and delivery terms due to the modified requirement. So there are several reasons, or there are several things that can make you end up modifying your purchase. Okay? And so in this case, we're talking about things like a buyer sets up cost reduction target for the year and so attempts to get the same item for a lower price from the same supplier. A buyer reviews the number of suppliers it has and finds that it has multiple suppliers for the same item. And so the buyer chooses one supplier, renegotiates the term to get a volume discount. Or even a change in regulation, which means that a product has to be modified and this requires changes to the specification of the component that are procured. Depending on the changes, the modified rebuy requires more effort from the buyer to find an acceptable solution. And which sort of situations are we likely to use these? So modified rebuys are likely to be used in scenarios like components for production, consulting services using a consultancy that the organization has used before but with a new brief, or even scaling software services. That's modified rebuy. What about a new purchase? Because with a new purchase, as the name suggests, you're just buying something for the first time. So in this case, a new product is added to an organization's offer that uses material or components not sourced before. There are changes in legislation, which means a public sector department has to offer new service that requires skills and experience not used in other services that are already offered. Technology changes and new equipment is needed. Any of those cases, okay? In any of those cases, you're going to do a new purchase, right? I mean, you're not modifying anything. It's like this is a new thing and it requires new solution, or a new problem that requires completely new solution, hence the need for a new purchase. Now, a company realizes that several computers being used by their employees are outdated and are in fact slowing down productivity. So in that case, what is going to happen? Okay, they're not modifying any computers that they have, right? They have to get new computers. But then the question becomes, what kind of computers, right? So the IT department helps answer that by outlining specifications required for the new computers, things like minimum 16 GB RAM, okay, SSD storage of 512 GB, quad-core processor, 24-inch monitors, those sort of things. So the procurement, in this case, the procurement department has specifications that they need to go out there and make sure that whatever they're buying meet those specifications. So they have the specifications. So in this case, we have computers, yes, they're old. Go buy new ones. It's a new purchase. Basically, this is an example of a new purchase, right? So requests for quotations are put out, supplier quotes are evaluated, and a supplier is selected. An order is placed, okay? The goods are sent. They check to make sure that whatever they've bought is correct. So that's pretty much how new purchase works. Public sector procurement obviously require more transparency and details than private sector procurement. You see, the thing is, with public sector, whenever you're buying something new, see that's just an example of new purchase in private sector. In public sector, things are going to be a bit complicated because in public sector, they might actually require people to put out tenders. Okay. In fact, most tenders are mostly used in public sector than in private sector. Because in private sector, somebody will just say, I know that supplier, or I have a list of suppliers that I already pre-approved. Of these, the guy I know and I want us to work. But you see, you don't do that in public sector mostly because you are dealing with people's money. To sum it up, the tasks involved in new procurement activity include understanding the business requirement, writing an effective specification for what is needed, researching the supply market, okay, researching key suppliers in the market, deciding on key capabilities that suppliers must have, writing invitation to tender documentation, managing the tender process, negotiating, and finally selecting the supplier and contract award and all that thing. So that was new purchase. Okay, so remember 3 things. There is new purchase, there is modified purchase, there is straight rebuy. You need to know the difference. You need to know how they all work in practice. Let us look at the implication of business needs on the type of purchase. And the thing you have to understand is that irrespective of the sector you are dealing with, irrespective of the sector, be it public or private, all these, okay, both of those ones have missions. They all have objectives. For private sector organization, this could mean providing a specific group of customers with product or service. And doing that is going to translate into profit, which will lead to increase in shareholders, investment or maximization of shareholders' wealth, people who've actually invested in the company. Public sector organizations, on the other hand, are set up to provide people with services that are not available from private sector or better provided by non-profit organization. Either way, okay? Either way, whichever sector you are in, the business needs of that sector will affect how procurement functions are carried. So there's always going to be that. There's always going to be how procurement comes in to meet these business needs. And first of all, the business needs will depend on the sector you're dealing with. So just have that one at the back of your mind. The rack scheme model is one of the ways to identify business needs. So the model takes 6 themes of needs and ranks them in specific order. That is regulatory, which covers any legal requirement from regulatory bodies, assurance of supply, so this covers the continuity of supply of goods and services when required and is based on factors such as capacity, financial stability, and risk. We have quality. This is the consistency, okay, repeatability, and how fit for purpose the procured goods and services are. We have service requirements. Okay, these are factors associated with the way services are supplied. For example, flexibility, availability of support, such as, help desk. We have cost. Now, cost is interesting because you're going to look at these last. But it includes things like target cost, whole life cost, okay, benchmarked prices, etc. We have innovation, okay. It is necessary to look at innovation, particularly in terms of the means of improving customer experience. For example, the use of emerging technology, customers, let us go ahead, okay? So let us go ahead and see how that actually works in practice. Because when you just say rack scheme, right, it is a model, right? Okay, but how does it work in practice? Imagine a company that manufactures recording equipment, and in this case, they are in need of high quality electronic components for a new line of smart microphones they are making. And so in this case, the procurement is trying to figure out, okay, we have regulatory requirements that you have to comply with. So what about the people you're dealing with? Can they comply with those ones? And these could include things like, REACH, the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemical, which is mainly in the AU anyway. So the procurement officer will require those suppliers to show evidence that they've actually complied with the regulatory standards in that field. So that is the first thing. We have regulatory standards. Have you guys complied with them? Yes. Can you show evidence in this case? And that will mean verification of compliance certificates, as well as checking for any pending regulatory changes that might impact future orders. And then we have assurance of supply. Now, they are making microphones, the smart microphones. And let's say the company wants to make 1 million of these things within that business year. So they don't want to start doing these and then suddenly the supply chain is disrupted because these people have some issues. So in this case, what does the business need? The procurement officer will have to assess the supplier's production capacity, lead times, contingency plans in case of supply chain disruptions. This might even require the supplier to commit to holding an agreed amount of safety stock or diversify their manufacturing location to reduce the risk of supply interruptions, because we want you to assure us that once we start getting these things, given the amount that we want, there's not going to be some supply disruption that you couldn't have controlled or that you couldn't have seen and taken care of. And then next we have quality, and in this case, it's just a question of the quality standards that the company has with respect to whatever it is that they're producing and the customers they're selling these things to. So they'll need the supplier to also prove that, or at least show that they're in a position to supply things that will, meet those quality standards. What else do we have? We have services. And so the company will at some point require strong after-sales support, such as quick responses to inquiries, flexible delivery options, and efficient handling of any issues that may arise during production. And then we have cost. So remember that at the end of the day, the company, we're not just buying these things and manufacturing them. We also have our needs. The company needs to maintain a competitive product price in the market while keeping production costs within budget. And this is where something like the total cost of ownership comes in. So it's not just an issue of we bought at this price, because total cost of ownership is more than the price. And that means factoring in addition to per unit cost, things like transportation, tariffs, potential downtime due to delays. And then we also have, finally, innovation. That just means looking at how these people are working. For example, if they're supplying us with chips and things of those nature, are they up to date? What are their plans to improve if the market changes, or if there are new technologies that are emerging? Do they have a plan to do that? Or are they just going to be supplying the same old stuff? Once identified, so the business requirements will be used to inform a range of procurement activities, such as defining evaluation criteria, testing the available options to ensure they satisfy the company's overall needs, developing performance measures, reevaluating your sourcing strategy if circumstances change. So that's the thing. That's that model, right? And that is how it works in practice. The point here is just to make sure that you not just understand the theory, but you also understand how that thing works in practical. Now let's talk about how the business needs can affect the type of purchase that you're dealing with. For example, the straight, rebuy, the modified rebuy, or even the new purchase. How do they get affected by our business needs, or how do our business needs affect those sort of purchases? And let's start with a straight rebuy. So for a straight rebuy, the business will have already identified what they need. They'll have already identified their specifications. So you're just saying, this is what you've been dealing with, this is what we need, and now let's just go and get 50 more of these because we already know what you want. Generally, suppliers will already be contracted to agreed terms and conditions, and procurement task is a straightforward one of raising a requisition and placing a purchase order. But then that doesn't mean that the business needs aren't going to affect these. We are still going to have needs, and those needs can affect straight rebuy in the sense that they can suggest a need to optimize inventory replenishment method. So the idea is, while you want to make purchase, you need to do it in a way that doesn't lead to extra cost and also doesn't make you risk stockouts. So that is how you end up with methods like just-in-time, utilization of economic order quantity calculations, etc. Also, you'll need to periodically review existing specifications and arrangements against supply market development to ensure that they still represent the optimum solution. So remember, a purchase is a straight rebuy if one or more of the following conditions apply. Number one, a list of approved suppliers exists and terms and conditions have previously been agreed. New suppliers are not considered. The process for ordering is procurement approved and routine. Buyers have relevant buying experience, and require little to no new information. But then there is a question of modified rebuy. So how does business needs affect these ones? Okay. And remember, with modified rebuy, you're just saying that it's something that you already had or you've bought before, but now you're making some changes to that particular purchase. So the changes could be in terms of the specification of that thing. The changes could be in terms of price. The changes could, it's not just the same contract. So it could be the same goods, or it is in fact the same goods or service, but there is something that has changed in that contract. When dealing with a modified rebuy, then it could be important to revisit the business needs and see areas you may want to focus on. This could mean review existing specification and arrangement against supply development to ensure that they still represent the optimum solution, reopening existing contract to competition to ensure that existing suppliers remain competitive, renegotiating contract terms. Most of the time, modified rebuy will only work effectively if you have some sort of purchasing or sourcing strategy in place. And speaking of sourcing strategy, this is something that you can come up with through the following steps. Define the scope of spend for the strategy and the requirement of the user or budget holder. And that will mean asking questions like, what do we need to buy? Okay. These are you identify the goods or services that are needed, like raw materials, machinery, components, and services. You also have to understand the quality, volume, delivery expectation from internal stakeholders, for instance, the engineering and operation teams. Remember, procurement doesn't just happen in vacuum. Okay, it's not just, I have my office and therefore you're just going to buy stuff. Not really. When these requisitions are put up, you need to understand that, or rather you need to make sure that the people you're dealing with, or in this case, the internal stakeholders, you need to make sure that you understand their needs, right? So it's going to be a cross-functional or collaborative thing. So number 2, assess the current spend. So in this case, you have to review historical procurement data. This way you can understand what is currently being purchased, from which supplier, at what cost, and at what terms. By doing this, okay, you're going to be putting yourself in a position to figure out any inefficiencies, overlapping suppliers, or opportunities to consolidate spending. And then you also want to assess, number 3, the supply market. And your goal here is to find out who offers what. So the goal is to conduct a market analysis to identify key suppliers and range of goods or services they provide in relation to the needs you've identified. And then you want to analyze the total cost. Okay, remember, cost is more than just the price, right? So that will include things like logistics, transportation, taxes, lead times, potential tariffs, after-sales services. And what are you trying to do here? Okay, in this case, your goal is to answer the question of how much does it cost to provide those goods or services. Number 5, identify suitable suppliers. Okay, who can we buy from? That is the question that you're trying to answer here. Number 6, develop a strategy. Based on the information you have, you could consider sourcing locally versus internationally, single versus multiple supplier, balancing cost with risk management. Number 7, decide on the route to the market. At this point, you have to decide how formal or informal do you want to do this. For instance, are you just going to use, or rather to request for quotation and then based on your analysis, place a purchase order, or are you going to go the full tender approach? So that's what you have to decide there. How formal or informal are we going to be? Next, decide how to implement the new supply arrangement. Then decide how to track results and benefits. Finally, define the trigger events that will restart the sourcing process. Basically, events that will prompt a review or reinitiate the sourcing process. And these could be things like contract expiration, changes in market conditions, supplier performance issues, or shift in production requirements. There is that, okay? That's just the idea that modified rebuy will require you to have some sort of sourcing strategy. And that's how you can develop one if you don't have one. Now, there is the question of how business needs are going to affect a new purchase. And the thing you have to understand is that with a new purchase, there are a lot of people involved because you're buying something for the first time, okay? It's a new purchase. And so there's going to be a lot of teamwork as opposed to a straight rebuy where you're just like, get us that thing again. Or modified where it's like, yeah, we know what you want, slight change, and then you get it. So with a new purchase, lots of people are going to be involved. A new purchase situation is characterized by the following. Number one, the need for a new product or service not used before. There is no existing experience of buying this item, and a lot of information is needed before the purchase can be made. And in that case, the business needs will lead to or could lead to things like a need for systematic purchasing research, and that will include activities like demand analysis, vendor analysis, supply market analysis, a need to develop specification, supplier performance measures such as KPIs, and contract terms, etc. The point there is just for you to understand that when you're talking about business needs versus, or rather how business needs affect the sort of purchase you're dealing with, well, when it comes to straight rebuy, you're starting everything from the scratch. When it comes to a new purchase, you're starting everything from the scratch. With a straight rebuy, the needs, you're not really going to be affected that much, but you still have to be careful in terms of things like stock, because if you're just buying things and putting them there, then you could be incurring an extra cost that you would have otherwise avoided. With a modified rebuy, again, in as much as you're making the changes, it mostly just depends on your sourcing strategy. So if there is any question, you ask. Now let's talk about the role of procurement in developing a business case. And obviously, the first question is, what exactly is a business case? And a business case is just a justification for taking an action, like the procurement justifying why they need to do something or why you need to support them in whatever it is that they are doing. It captures the benefits of the proposed action, any risks involved and how they can be mitigated, timescales for completing the project, and the roles and responsibilities involved, that is, who will do what. So let's go ahead and understand this from a purchasing and supplies perspective, because that is what we're actually doing here, right? So let's look at a business case from that angle, because there could be a business case from just about any angle. So from a purchasing and supplies perspective, in procurement, a business case can be looked at as a document or presentation used to justify the need for a specific procurement activity, showing value and benefits of the procurement activity to the organization. Before we actually jump into the theory of why it's important and sections of a business case, blah, 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 let's just look at a simple example demonstrating what it is and how it actually works. So in this case, let's imagine a company that makes automotive parts, and the company has outdated equipment, making it struggle to keep up with demand. So the problem here is that we have outdated equipment and we need to solve that. So let's look at that in terms of the procurement goals, because that is where we're starting. Now, the goal is to procure new advanced manufacturing equipment that will increase production capacity by 30%, reduce downtime by 50%, decrease maintenance and repair costs, support the company's expansion into new market. If you present that to the senior management, you tell them, these are our goals, then the first question they're going to ask you, or one of the questions that they will ask you is, what are our options? And in this case, you need to give them the options, So the options could be, number one, upgrade the existing machines at a lower cost, but with limited improvement in efficiency. 2, purchase brand new state-of-art equipment with higher upfront cost, but long-term benefits in productivity and efficiency. Third option could be outsource part of the production to a third-party supplier to manage increased demand, avoiding immediate capital expenditure. Once you've presented those options, you need to justify each. So that's the thing, So like if, those are your options, you decide. Remember, you are trying, there's what you want, As the procurement officer, there is what you want to go with. So there is an option that you like. And so a business case is just saying, look, this is what I want us to do. Here are things that we could do, but here's how that will look like. Anyway, moving forward, this could look something like this. Cost-benefit analysis, option 1, which was upgrading the existing equipment. So initial cost will be $200,000. Expected improvement, 10% increased in capacity. Potential for breakdowns, very high. What about option 2, which was purchasing new equipment? Now that will initially cost us $600,000. Expected improvement, 30%, So 30% increase in capacity, 50% reduction in downtime. And then long-term ROI, return on investment, is very high. What about outsourcing, which was option 3? Annual cost, $300,000. No need for capital investment, but we end up depending on a third-party supplier. We've given them the options. It doesn't really mean that they're going to jump to the one that you want. It's like, if you go with those ones, that is what that will look like. Okay? What about the risks? They could ask you that. What about the risks? Those risks that you've suggested, how can you mitigate them in each case so that you can know which one to go with? So with option 1, okay, there's going to be continued high maintenance cost and risk of further breakdowns. So in this case, the mitigation could be short-term solution, but doesn't address long-term growth. Option 2, okay, what about the risks involved here? The risk is high upfront cost and long-term lead time for installation. That is going to secure financing. So the mitigation here will be secure financing through capital investment and staggered payments. What about option 3? Since that is outsourcing, so there's going to be a lot of dependency on third-party suppliers, which could lead to quality control issues and loss of in-house expertise. Unless so with mitigation, unless we regularly audit the third-party suppliers to ensure that, there is contractual safeguard. So now that we've given them the 3 options, remember there is one that you want. So we are still going to have to recommend the one that you want. And our recommendation, so what is your recommendation? They might ask you that. And this is when you recommend option 2, which was to purchase new equipment. Right. So that's just a simple example of what a business case might look like. It's like, this is the problem, these are our goals, these are our options, this is how we evaluate those options, okay? And this is the one that we recommend, and the reason for recommending it is that. What is the purpose? So what is the purpose of a business case? There are a number of reasons why we do business case, okay? This could include a contract is coming to an end and the product or service needs to be procured again. Cost reduction need to be made, and this requires changes to the way the organization operates. Number 3, an alternative product or service has been found that potentially delivers a number of benefits. Okay, with all those in mind, then you can say that a business case will enable the management to evaluate proposal for feasibility, sustainability, and acceptability. It will also enable the management to compare alternatives and options on objective business cost benefit criteria. And finally, it will enable the management to establish, or at least it will enable us to establish, a measurable yardstick by which the subsequent performance, deliverables, or outcomes of a project can be evaluated at key review points. There are a lot of benefits that are associated with the business case. It's just a question of what exactly you're dealing with. Okay, so whatever it is that you want to do that needs justification. Right, again, as we continue, remember, if there is any question you ask. So this is not just one of those situations where you just sit there with your question, right? If there is any question, you ask. Let's talk about identifying the problem or opportunity. So the first thing that you're going to be doing with the business case is to either identify a problem that is going to be solved or an opportunity that is supposed to be exploited. Problems and opportunities can at times just appear as the same thing. A business that supplies the public sector can be faced with shrinking government budgets, and that will mean fewer sales. You can obviously look at that as a problem and say, look, how about we just find a way of reducing our costs so that we can reduce our price at the end and still manage to do this thing that you've been doing. That is a problem that you've solved, right? But what about opportunity? Because there is an opportunity, right? So opportunity can present itself in this form. They can outsource the public sector part of the business to a third party and focus the organization's resources on developing new markets. So when you talk about problems, okay, problems can generally be classified into 2, or in this case, you can classify them into 2. And you're talking about the closed-ended problems, which appear when something happens that should not have happened. An example here could include things like the price of a key raw material suddenly increases and makes a product less profitable. An employee is underperforming and not achieving the expected results. There is an unusual high level of purchase invoice errors. And then we have open-ended problems. Okay, remember, closed-ended, open-ended, in which something is stopping the achievement of an objective or blocking progress. And an example of such, okay, will include things like an agreement from a senior management is required for additional budget to hire people into the new organizational structure. There is an emerging monopoly in a key market and competition needs to be stimulated. 10% cost reduction is needed across all patches to meet new corporate objectives. An individual wants to start a category management program, but the organization will not cooperate. That's the first thing. You have to identify the problem. Think of it this way. If you are doing something like if you're manufacturing this thing and then suddenly you realize you've run out of suppliers who are providing you with these plastics, you see, that is a closed-ended problem, because it's just you are doing something, then something has happened, and the solution is simple. You have to find another supplier who does that. Now, an open-ended could be you want to manufacture the pen, but then the board or whoever, your senior management, doesn't want you to do that because they're probably not approving the project. So that is open-ended. It means you need to find various ways to actually solve that problem. Anyway, we'll still come back to that as we continue. But the idea is simple. The first thing is identifying the problem. What is the next thing? Solving the problem. So at times a solution to a problem may look easy, but it isn't actually the solution to the real problem. Let's say a hospital needs to understand why it's failing to meet targets, cancelling too many operations, and sending patients home on the day of operation. Now you can look at that and say, well, look, if you're cancelling these operations, maybe it's because you don't have staff. That might look like that, or because you don't have equipment. I mean, yeah, that is what it looks like, but you need to do a deep analysis into that problem to identify a solution. So by applying the 5 whys analysis, the hospital arrives at various issues, meaning why is this happening? So their first why. Why is that happening? Because no sterilized equipment is available. Why? Because there are insufficient set of equipment. Why? Because the sterilized process takes too long. Why? Because sterilizers are not used properly. Okay, why is that? Because operatives have not all been trained. And so you quickly realize that actually you're better off just training your operatives to use the sterilizers effectively, as opposed to saying, let's just buy more. Because you just end up buying more equipments that the people who are supposed to use don't know how to use them. So it's cheaper to just train them. And you only arrive at that by asking yourself, why is this happening? Because of that. Why? Because of that. Why is that? Because of that. Why? So it's the 5 whys, like the first problem, and then why is this problem happening? Why is that problem happening? Why is the third one happening? The 5th why is why is the 4th problem happening? So there is that. Generally, once the problem has been identified, the following 8-step process is a useful model for solving problems in procurement. And number 1, what is the current situation? So you start by figuring out what you're currently dealing with. Is it an open-ended or is it a closed-ended sort of problem? Closed problems are often identified using performance monitoring system. In this case, you have a target and you have a way of measuring if that target has been achieved. So the question then becomes the results that we have, okay? Are they closer to that target or not? If they are not, then why is that happening? So you see, that's a closed problem. It's like we need to manufacture 10 of these things. We've only manufactured 4. What happened to the 6? Okay? For open-ended problems, a simple approach is start by writing down a problem statement stating, how do I, blah, blah, blah. So for example, an effective problem statement often contains the key feature of the problem in such a way that it helps to point towards a solution. An example here could be something like, how do I create a breakthrough cost reduction of 20% or more? So in this case, the problem statement stating that it needs to be a breakthrough implies that the solution must be radical and innovative, while the target of 20% identifies that the solution has to be a big improvement on what is currently being done. So that is why it's open. You're not limited. I mean, look, if we just said you need to produce 10, we've only produced 4. So it's just a question of what happened to the other 6. But if we say we need a big breakthrough, okay, so we need something to happen, something unique to happen. Why? Because you also need to meet 20%. So the 20% is going to change our position in the organization. See, that's open. That requires you to do a lot of thinking as opposed to a closed problem where it's just, that is a problem, fix that. So with open problems, it's always a question of, I want to do something and then something is stopping me from doing that thing. So how do I remove that obstacle? With closed problem is usually just, this thing is running smoothly, there's a breakdown here, fix that one, and then you move on. Okay? So anyway, that's the first thing. Step 2, what do we know? Now, once you've identified your problem, you just don't rush in the solution, right? You just don't be like, yeah, well, we are supposed to produce 10, we're only producing 4. We need to produce the 6 as quick as possible. There are a lot of questions you need to ask yourself. What exactly do you know about the problem? What exactly do you know about the reasons why you're only producing 4 pens instead of 10, as opposed to the, as per the original target? This is the data gathering step, and it might also include verbal comments gained through interviews and surveys. So you want to go out, get information, right? Or you want to get as much information about that problem as possible. Step next, which in this case is step 3, what are the underlying issues? At this point, you analyze the data you've collected and use it to redefine the problem identified. For instance, you may have identified the problem to be, we don't train staff, only to realize it is the staff are actually less motivated, which means you need to figure out how to motivate them, okay? Be it intrinsic motivation or extrinsic. So it's just a question of saying, Tuesday show up, and then you're going to have somebody who's like there with the flip chart and saying blah, 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 and you write, that's not the problem. The problem is they aren't motivated, okay? Anyway, the next step 4, what are the strategic options? And in this step, you are generating options. Remember, it's one thing to have a problem, it's another thing to understand your options. So here you're generating options so that you can figure out how to deal with the underlying issue. The acronym SCAMPA can help you with this. So in this case, the first S, substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to other uses, eliminate, and reverse. Each of those can be turned into a question, and then you find an answer to that question. For example, let's say the company's problem is how to reduce cost. So the question can be, could we substitute this item for another? Okay? So in that case, if the answer is yes, you can substitute this item for another, then we are hoping that the substitute is a cheaper one, or a cost reduction sort of substitute. So SCAMPA can help in that case. Anyway, number next. So what is the best option? This is where you're looking at all the options that were generated, because there was the problem, there was the data that you gathered, all the way to where you came up with the options. And so which is the best option? And that means define the ideal solution, eliminate those which do not meet any constraint that there may be, evaluate the remaining solutions against the ideal solution definition, assess the risk associated with the best solution, make the decision. And number 6, how should we implement the plan? So now, you've started with the problem all the way to solutions. And so there is the question of how do we now implement that? And one of the ways, as you're doing this, as you're coming up with your plan and implementation and all that, there's going to be the question of assigning people responsibilities. Okay? And this is where the RESI matrix comes in. RESI matrix will show who's responsible. So responsible, that is the person who will actually perform a task in the plan. Accountable, that is the person who has overall control of the project and has the power to say yes or no. Consulted, the people who need feedback on the progress and may make some input to the work. Informed, that is the people who need to know about any decisions made for the project. And so once you've done that, then the next step will be to find out if we've achieved our objectives and what can be improved on. Have we achieved what we intended to achieve, and what exactly in that process can we improve on? So all that stuff is just supposed to help you define, or rather or come up with your business case. Okay? It's simple, really. What is happening here is it's not that complicated. We have a business need. Okay? And we need somebody to anyway, we have a business need. We found a solution, and we need somebody to approve that solution. So what do? We justify that solution, or we justify the option that you've taken. We come up with a business case. So all those things you're talking about are supposed to help you in that case. Okay? Be it a new buy, okay, or indeed any other problem that you could be having in procurement. So there is that. Anyway, if there is any question, let me know. Let's look at the next thing. So we know that a business case is a justification for an action that you're about to take. So if it is in procurement, there is an option that you've decided on, or there is something that you want to do as a procurement person, and you need the senior management to justify or to approve that action. And so you're writing a business case, or you're developing a business case to justify why your action makes sense and they should approve it. The question then can be, what are the various sections of a business case? And generally, a business case will contain the following section. Generally, it will depend. But these are some of the ones that are going to be in just about any business case you can look at. In this case, you're talking about number 1, executive summary, which is a clear, persuasive, and comprehensive summary of the contents of the business case. Next, long-term strategy consideration, in which case an analysis, or this is an analysis of how this business case fits with the broader procurement and business objective. Because look, at the end of the day, if you just say we are going to buy this thing and you're going to save 20% or whatever percent, that can look like a good idea in terms of the finance position of the company, saving 20%. But what about longevity? That thing that we've just bought, is it actually going to solve a problem? And for how long will it solve a problem before we go back to the market and get one? Anyway, next, business requirements. There is a clear statement of what the business needs and evidence that cross-functional collaboration has resulted in an agreement on the requirements. Why? Because we need to involve other internal stakeholders. Otherwise, if you just sit in your office as a procurement manager or whatever it is, and then you come up with something and then you go to the board or to the whoever you're going to, and they approve that thing, then the question is, what about the other teams that are going to use that thing? Were they consulted? If the answer is no, then there is no sustainability in whatever it is that you're trying to do, because it's just your idea. So we are simply saying we are avoiding the top-down approach. We are using the bottom-up, where we actually find out from the people who are actually using this thing, okay, or the action that you want to take, the people who are actually going to be impacted, were they involved, right? Next, price and cost analysis. There is evidence that shows costs have been analyzed and benchmarked to show that the target price is reasonable. Return on investment analysis. There is a review that indicates whether a gain or loss has been generated compared with the initial cost and how much there is. Then you have market analysis, a clear and perceptive review of the current structure, issue, and likely developments within the market for this item. It will also have a risk analysis. There is a review of the probability and impact of the risk occurring, taking into account the organization's risk appetite. That is, how much risk an organization take without affecting its operation. I mean, there are things where the organization can have a high risk appetite. And there are scenarios where the organization's risk appetite can be low. So remember, the subject of risk just depends on things like the probability of that risk happening versus the impact of that risk. So if the probability of that thing happening is low, and the impact, if it happens actually, isn't even that high, then an organization can have a high risk appetite when it comes to that particular thing. If the impact is high and the probability of it happening is high, the organization might be like, not really, we don't want that. Unless if we pull it off and we actually manage, then you're going to make a lot of money, if it is a money thing. So anyway, it's a whole thing, right? But moving on, supplier analysis. There is the current and potential supplier performance and capability. Technical development analysis of likely trends in technology and innovation that might affect supply. We have vulnerability analysis, which is an indication of areas that might make the organization vulnerable, together with analysis of the risk and the action to minimize them. Sourcing objectives for both cost and value. detailed in a comprehensive and balanced way. We have implementation plan, okay? That is roles and responsibilities, tasks and milestones, fully detailed. It will also have long-term benefits, okay? Considering the long-term social value, cultural benefits, economic development factors may be included, especially within public sector procurement. Because with public sector procurement, again, remember you're dealing with you're not dealing with the money, you're dealing with public funds. And so with public funds, there's always the question of sustainability. There's always the question of, once you've done this thing, are we also going to like next year do it again? Or is it something that we do going to serve for a given, duration? So there is that. It's a bit complicated. Then we have sustainability, which you've mentioned. So consideration of sustainability, social value, cultural benefits, economic development factors may be included. And finally, we have competitive advantage. That is the summary of how this business case will create an advantage for the organization. Again, look, that is just a comprehensive business case. But depending on what you're dealing with, your business case may not include all those things. But the idea here, or the point is for you to remember that with a business case, you're just justifying why that action that you're taking should be taken. And so there are all those things. Okay? Remember, again, if you have any question, make sure you ask.